Hello there. Let's talk about the male sexual anatomy and physiology. Now, the first thing and the main thing you need to know is that in terms of male sexual anatomy and physiology, the only goal is to get these sperm to their ultimate destination, which is the female egg. So every structure in the reproductive system is designed for that delivery of sperm. So it all begins in the testes. If we look inside a testis, and there are two of them in the scrotum, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in a little bit. If we look inside a singular testis, we can see that it's divided into lobes, and in each lobe, there are these teeny tiny coiled tubules. These are called seminiferous tubules, and this is where sperm form. As they form, they travel along the length of the tubule through these ducts into this next structure, which itself is another coiled tubule. This is called the epididymis. Now, sperm mature in the epididymis, and this is where they stay until ejaculation. So, this is their storage spot. During ejaculation, the sperm move from the epididymis into this tube, which is the vas deferens, which is also the tube that is cut in a vasectomy when a man wishes to be surgically sterilized. So you'll also notice that the testes have a blood supply. So we've got oxygen-rich blood arriving in these arteries, oxygen-poor blood leaving in the veins, and these structures, which are nerves, in part designed to sense pain to keep the testes out of harm's way. Now, this is what a seminiferous tubule looks like under a very high magnification. This is a single tubule. Here's the center of the tubule, and this is cut in cross section. So if we look at the outside of the tubule, there are cells here that have their only job is to divide. And each time they divide and produce two new daughter cells, it pushes the previous generation of cells closer and closer to the middle of the tubule. As the cells move towards the center of the tubule, they're also continuing to mature, to finish their development process so that they're ready to be fully functional sperm. There are also cells here in between the dividing cells that sort of act to nurse the sperm along. And finally, there are cells outside of the tubule whose job it is to secrete testosterone, and that also helps with sperm production. Now, inside the seminiferous tubules, kind of where I'm moving my cursor right now, is what's known as the blood-testis barrier. In this diagram, it's represented by this red line that's connecting the cells. So this basement membrane here is the same thing as the layer that's on the outside of the seminiferous tubule. And in this space out here is where we have blood vessels and cells of the immune system. Now, here's the thing. Sperm will not be recognized by our immune system. Sperm aren't part of the man's body. Sperm are little foreigners, or designed to become little foreigners. So if immune cells were able to leave the blood vessels and get all the way in here to where the sperm are, they would produce antibodies that would begin attacking sperm and potentially rendering this testis infertile. So to ensure that that doesn't happen, these nurse cells that are supporting the dividing cell and the growing sperm have super tight connections that prevent white blood cells or antibodies from getting in here and causing harm. So that's called the blood-testis barrier. And this is one reason, the main reason, other than pain, that you should never actually intentionally damage someone's testes, and why in professional sports you see men wearing cups to protect the testes. Because if there is a physical injury, if the testis is, squished somehow, that can break this barrier, and that can allow the immune system access to the developing sperm. And once they're there, there's no getting rid of them. All right, so that's the blood testis barrier. And that's also why we don't want to do damage to anyone's testes, even if it looks funny on America's Funniest Home Videos. Not funny. Okay. Now, not all sperm are perfectly formed, and there are a number of things that can make it more likely that sperm will be good swimmers or will have problems that make it so that they can't reach their destination. Health and age and a number of factors play into that. But this is what a normal sperm looks like, except not those colors, but you get the idea. But sometimes they can form two heads, sometimes they can form two tails. Sometimes the motor section of the sperm, the part that actually makes the flagella spin around, is malfunctioning. Sometimes the head is too large. Sometimes the head is dented. Sometimes it's too small. Sometimes too pointy. And sometimes the flagellum won't unravel and do its thing. So not all sperm can make it to the destination. When you consider how many sperm the testes produce on an ongoing basis, it should not be surprising that there are some that don't turn out well. It's just like if we had a manufacturing center or a factory, the more product you run through all of those machines, the more likely you are to see some things that aren't produced properly, the rejects. Okay. So now let's talk a little bit more about the testicles. So, as I mentioned before, the testicles are held outside of the body in a sac of skin known as the scrotum. That's what you see here. There is tissue that divides the left and right testes, and that's because each testis is connected to what's called a spermatic cord that connects all of the tubes to the inside of the body, and we don't want the testes to spin around one another and to choke off the supply in that cord. It does occasionally happen, and it's pretty unpleasant. So each testis is surrounded by this connective tissue, kind of a rigid fabric made by our cells. And then it's also connected to muscle. Now, there are two muscles here. Here's one that you can see in this tube, and here's the other that we can see down here just under the skin. Now, the reason that we have both of these muscles is because sperm can only be produced at a very specific temperature, 2 degrees Celsius below body temperature. If they're warmer than that, then the sperm production is not going to work, or it's going to have too many sperm that are not formed properly. So they have to be at this very precise temperature, but the temperature in the environment changes all the time. So having these muscles gives the testes the ability to regulate their temperature. So let's say that it's a really cold day, and now the testicular temperature is dropping. These muscles will contract. These, which are kind of like suspenders, pull the testes up so that they are closer to the body, kind of like cuddling up on a cold day. So that helps to conserve warmth. And the muscle that you see out here causes the testes to come closer together. So they're coming closer together and moving up towards the body in order to stay warm. On a hot day, it's the opposite. These muscles relax, the testes drop away from the body. This muscle relaxes too, the testes can move away from each other, and that way they're able to cool off better. So that helps to keep them at the same temperature that's good for sperm production. Now, there's one more thing that helps the testes to maintain their temperature. Now, if you'll notice, the blood vessels are going down and up right next to each other. So when we have warm blood coming from the body, going in one direction, and cool blood from the testis going in the other direction, they can actually transfer heat. So, in other words, the warm blood coming from the body running next to this cold blood vessel, the heat will move over and heat this blood. That means that the blood that's going to the testis cools, and that means that the blood that's going back into the body is still warm, so it's not going to bring the body temperature down. Now, how important is testicular temperature? Pretty darn. There are some cultures where men practice birth control by daily dipping their testes into warm water. This is not a method of birth control that I am advocating for. I don't recommend it, but to the extent that it is effective, it's effective because it's affecting the temperature of the testes. Another example, when a couple is trying to conceive and having difficulty, the doctor will often recommend to the man that he not take warm baths or go in hot tubs, that he wear boxers instead of briefs, and avoid tight pants. Why? To let the testes be able to regulate their temperature. Now, the other thing about testes is that they have to be outside of the body in order to have the cooler temperature, but also if they remain inside the abdominal cavity, they are much more likely to become cancerous. So for individuals that have testes, but that say their receptors, their testosterone receptors didn't work and the testes are inside, they have to have those removed in order not to develop cancer, testicular cancer. Okay, that's it for that part.